My earliest memories are filled with the warmth of my father's smile and the comfort of our small rented apartment. I'm Carla, and until I was 13, my life was nothing but ordinary, in the best possible way. My dad, James, was the kind of father who made everything an adventure. Even though we lived in a modest apartment, he turned our tiny balcony into a fairy garden and our living room into a fort during rainy weekends. Mom, Sarah, was different, more reserved, always dreaming of a bigger house and a grander life. But back then, their differences seemed to balance each other out perfectly. "Carla, sweetie, would you like to spend the weekend at Grandpa's?" Mom would often ask, and I'd jump at the chance. Not because I didn't want to be home, but because Grandpa Richard's house was like a second home to me. It was this beautiful two-story Victorian with creaking wooden floors and endless corners to explore. "Your mother needs her alone time with your father," Grandpa would explain with a knowing smile when I'd arrive at his doorstep. "And I need my time with my favorite granddaughter." I was a perceptive child, more than the adults around me realized. I understood that Mom sometimes needed space, that she and Dad had their own relationship to nurture. It didn't hurt me, if anything, it made me feel mature. Plus, those weekends with Grandpa were precious. He'd tell me stories about Dad's childhood, teach me about managing money, he was a retired bank manager, and make the best pancakes in the world. "You know, Carla," he told me once while we were having breakfast on his porch, "your mother dreams of a house like this. But you know what's more important than a big house? A home filled with love." I nodded, understanding even at that young age. Our apartment might have been small, but it was filled with love. Dad would come home from his job at the insurance company, swing me around in his arms, and pepper Mom with kisses until she laughed despite herself. Those moments made our tiny space feel infinite. But life has a way of changing when you least expect it. I was 13 when Dad started losing weight rapidly. At first, he joked about it, saying he was finally getting in shape, but his eyes told a different story. The doctor's visits became more frequent, and Mom's face grew increasingly worried. "It's just a phase," Dad would say, ruffling my hair weakly. "I'll be back to my old self in no time." But he wasn't. The disease, aggressive pancreatic cancer, consumed him like a wildfire. Within months, my strong, vibrant father became a shadow of himself. I watched helplessly as Mom tried to hold everything together, but I could see her crumbling inside. The last conversation I had with Dad is forever etched in my memory. He was lying in his hospital bed, his hand barely strong enough to hold mine. "Take care of your mom for me, princess," he whispered. "And let Grandpa guide you. He's wiser than all of us combined." The year after Dad's death felt like living in a fog. Mom spiraled into such deep depression that she could barely look at me. I guess I reminded her too much of him. Thank goodness for Grandpa Richard. He became my rock, my safe harbor in the storm that our lives had become. Living in Grandpa's house wasn't just a temporary solution anymore, it became my new normal. Every morning, I'd wake up in what used to be Dad's old room, surrounded by his childhood photos and trophies. Grandpa made sure I kept up with school, helped me with homework, and tried his best to fill the void both my parents had left, one through death, the other through grief. Mom would call occasionally, but her voice always seemed distant, detached. Her visits were even rarer, quick stops where she'd barely meet my eyes, before rushing off again. I learned to stop expecting more. Then, exactly 1 year and 2 months after Dad's death, everything changed. Mom showed up at Grandpa's door one sunny Saturday morning, and I almost didn't recognize her. Gone was the grieving widow in black, replaced by someone wearing a bright yellow dress and sporting a new haircut. Her face was glowing with unhappiness. "Carla, sweetie, pack your things. You're coming home," she announced, bouncing on her heels like a teenager. I looked at Grandpa, confused. He seemed just as surprised as I was. The drive back to our apartment was filled with Mom's cheerful chatter about everything and nothing. It was like sitting next to a stranger who happened to look like my mother. But the real shock came when we walked through our apartment door. There, in our small living room, stood a tall man and a girl who looked about 3 years younger than me. They both smiled awkwardly as Mom practically danced to their side. Carla, meet Robert and his daughter Emma. Robert is my fiancé, and Emma will be your new sister. We're getting married soon. Mom beamed, clutching Robert's arm. The room started spinning. What? When did this happen? Oh, we've been dating for a while now. Mom waved her hand dismissively. I didn't tell anyone about our relationship. You know how people can get jealous and judgmental. It was better this way. I stumbled to my old room, barely registering that it had been redecorated. With trembling hands, I pulled out my phone and called Grandpa. He answered on the first ring. Mom has a fiancé, I whispered into the phone. She's getting married and didn't tell anyone. There's a man here, and his daughter. Grandpa arrived within 20 minutes. I could hear the conversation from my room as he confronted Mom. Sarah, how could you do this without telling anyone? Without telling your own daughter? Dad, I'm happy for the first time in forever. Mom's voice was defensive. I've decided to start fresh, to live again. James would want that. He wouldn't want me to waste away in depression forever. There was a long pause before Grandpa spoke again, his voice heavy with resignation. I hope you'll be happy, Sarah. Just, don't forget you have a daughter who needs you too. The 3 months before the wedding were like living in some twisted alternate reality. Our small apartment felt even more cramped with 4 people instead of 2, but that wasn't the worst part. What really got to me was watching Emma, my soon-to-be stepsister, wrap my mother around her finger. Mom, can you help me with my hair? Emma would say, and my mother would drop everything, including our conversation, to assist her. The way she said Mom made my skin crawl, especially since she'd only known my mother for a few months. Mom seemed blind to everything except Emma. When Emma mentioned she loved ballet, Mom immediately signed her up for private lessons, something I'd begged for years ago but was told we couldn't afford. When Emma complained about her old phone being too slow, Mom bought her the latest iPhone model. When Emma wanted to redecorate her side of the bedroom we now shared, Mom took her shopping and spent hundreds of dollars on new bedding, curtains, and decorations. Your sister needs to feel welcome here, Mom would say whenever I tried to point out the disparity in treatment. Stepsister, I'd correct her. And I need to feel welcome too. She'd just shake her head and walk away. The wedding day itself was a modest affair at a local venue, but Mom glowed with happiness. I stood there in my bridesmaid dress, watching as she fussed over Emma's hair and makeup, barely sparing me a glance. Throughout the ceremony and reception, Mom kept Emma close, holding her hand, introducing her to everyone as my beautiful daughter. I might as well have been a waitress for all the attention I received. Grandpa gave them a check for $5,000 as a wedding gift, a generous amount by any standard. But I overheard Mom's reaction when she cornered him by the restrooms. Really, Dad? A check? She hissed, her face flushed from champagne and anger. I was counting on you giving us your house. We're a proper family now, we need the space. That apartment is too small for 4 people. Grandpa remained calm, though I could see the disappointment in his eyes. Sarah, you're rushing everything. First the sudden engagement, now this? That house isn't just property to be handed over on a whim. Besides, it's where Carla spends half her time now. Oh, so that's it? You're playing favorites now? No, I'm being practical. And maybe you should be too. I slipped away before they could notice me, but the conversation haunted me. My mother had changed so much that I barely recognized her anymore. She'd created this new perfect family in her mind, with Emma as the star child and Robert as the ideal husband. There didn't seem to be any room left for me. So I did what any unwanted person would do, I spent more and more time at Grandpa's house. At least there, I didn't have to pretend to be happy about being replaced. For years have passed since that moment, and I was about to graduate from high school. Living in that apartment had become a masterclass in avoiding conflict. I'd learned to be quiet, to take up as little space as possible, to spend most of my time either in my room or at Grandpa's. One evening, during our weekly family dinner, another exercise in pretending we were one big happy family, I decided to share my plans for the future. "I've been accepted to State University," I announced, trying to keep my voice steady. "I want to study finance and business management." The silence that followed was deafening. Mom put down her fork, exchanged a look with Robert, and cleared her throat. "Actually, Carla, I think it would be better if you started working after graduation. College isn't necessary for everyone." I stared at her, bewildered. "What are you talking about?" "Dad set up a college fund for me before he died. He always wanted me to get higher education." Mom shifted uncomfortably in her chair. "About that fund, Robert and I have been talking, and we think it would be better to save that money for Emma's education. She's incredibly talented, you know. Top of her class and everything. She'll need a good university education to reach her full potential." Robert nodded sagely. "Emma has shown remarkable aptitude in her studies. It would be the right thing to do, Carla. You could work for a few years, save up, and then go to college if you still want to." I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. "The college fund, the last gift my father had arranged for me, they wanted to take that too?" "That money is mine," I said, my voice shaking with anger. "Dad left it specifically for MY education. You can't just give it to Emma." "Don't be selfish, Carla." Mom's eyes filled with tears. "Emma is your sister." "Stepsister." I stood up so quickly, my chair fell backward. "And that money is the last thing I have from Dad. You've given her everything else, my room, your attention, your love. But you can't have this. I won't let you take it." "How dare you?" Mom was crying now, but I could see the manipulation in her tears. "After everything we've done for you. Emma needs." "Emma needs? What about what I need? What about what Dad wanted for me?" The argument ended with doors slamming and tears, mostly Mom's, as she wailed about my selfishness. After that night, the apartment became even more hostile. No one spoke to me unless absolutely necessary. Emma would smirk whenever she passed me in the hallway, and Robert wouldn't even look in my direction. When graduation day came, I wasn't surprised to find only Grandpa in the audience. He cheered loud enough for 4 people when they called my name, and his proud smile meant more to me than anything my new family could have offered. That evening, I packed everything I owned into 3 cardboard boxes and my old suitcase. Grandpa helped me load them into his car. "Your room is always ready for you, sweetheart," he said as we drove away from the apartment. "Always has been, always will be." I didn't look back as we left. There was nothing there for me anymore. College life became my escape. I threw myself into my studies, determined to make my father and Grandpa proud. The business and finance courses fascinated me, and I found myself excelling in ways that would have made Dad smile. Every evening, I'd call Grandpa to share what I'd learned. "Tell me again about derivatives," he'd say, even though he knew more about finance than my professors. "I love hearing you explain it." But as my college years progressed, I noticed changes in Grandpa's voice during our calls. He got tired more easily, and his usual sharp wit sometimes seemed dulled. During my visits home, I caught him wincing when he stood up or rubbing his chest when he thought I wasn't looking. "It's just age catching up with me," he'd say whenever I asked about his health. "Nothing to worry about, sweetheart." But I did worry. I started calling him twice a day instead of once, and I'd drive home every weekend I could, not just on holidays. We'd sit in his kitchen, drinking tea and talking about everything and nothing, just like we used to. Sometimes I'd catch him looking at me with such intense love that it made my throat tight. It was the middle of my final semester when Mom called. I almost didn't answer. It was the first time she'd called in 4 years. But something made me pick up. "Grandpa died last night," she said, her voice flat and emotionless. "The funeral is on Thursday at 2 p.m. Hartford Funeral Home." The phone slipped from my hand. I don't remember much of what happened next, just that my roommate found me curled up on the floor, sobbing uncontrollably. Thursday came too quickly, and not quickly enough. The funeral home was exactly the kind of place Grandpa would have chosen, understated but elegant, with large windows letting in natural light. I arrived early, my black dress feeling too tight, my skin too sensitive, everything wrong, because Grandpa wasn't there to make it right. I expected to see Mom and her family, but they weren't there. Instead, Mr. Harrison, Grandpa's friend from his banking days, was organizing everything. "They're running a bit late," he said when I asked. "Your mother called to say they'd be delayed." The service was beautiful, filled with people from Grandpa's life sharing stories about his kindness, his integrity, his humor. I sat in the front row, alone with my grief, until halfway through the service when I heard the back door open. Mom swept in with Robert and Emma, all in perfectly coordinated black outfits. They took seats in the far back, and Mom didn't even glance in my direction. Her face was set in a mask of appropriate grief, but her eyes were already darting around the room, assessing, calculating. I turned back to face the front, my tears now burning with both grief and anger. Even here, even now, she couldn't acknowledge me. Couldn't put aside her pettiness for one day to mourn her own father. After the funeral service, I drove to Grandpa's house, my home for the past 4 years, only to stop short at the sight that greeted me. There, scattered across the front lawn like worthless debris, were garbage bags filled with my belongings. My clothes, my books, my photo albums, everything from my room had been unceremoniously thrown out. Some bags had split open, spilling my life across the grass. With trembling hands, I tried my key in the front door. It wouldn't turn. The lock had been changed. I was still standing there, key uselessly in hand, when the door swung open. Mom stood in the doorway, wearing the same black dress from the funeral, but now with an expression of triumph rather than grief. "Oh good, you're here to collect your things," she said, as if she was doing me a favor. "This is my house now. Dad's finally gone, and as his only child, I'm the rightful heir. I've already had the locks changed, we're moving in tonight." I stared at her, unable to process the cruelty of it all. "You couldn't even wait until after the funeral?" "These are my things, my home." "No, this is my home now," she cut me off sharply. "And you better take your stuff quickly, or it's going in the dumpster. I need to clear the space for Emma's things." She smiled coldly. "She's getting your old room, by the way. She's always wanted a bigger bedroom." I felt numb as I gathered my belongings, stuffing everything back into the torn bags, trying to collect the scattered photos of Dad and Grandpa from where they'd fallen in the grass. My mother stood in the doorway the entire time, watching me like a security guard, making sure I didn't try to steal anything. The drive back to my college dorm was a blur of tears and disbelief. My roommate helped me carry everything up, not asking questions when she saw my state. A week later, I received a call from a law firm. "Miss Johnson? This is Mr. Anderson from Anderson and Partners Law Firm. I'm your grandfather's notary. We need you to come in for the reading of his will. Would Thursday at 10 a.m. work for you?" I agreed, though I couldn't see the point. Mom had made it clear she was the heir to everything. When I arrived at the notary's office that Thursday, Mom, Robert, and Emma were already there, seated like royalty in the leather chairs. Emma was examining her manicure, while Robert scrolled through his phone. Mom's eyes narrowed when she saw me. "What are you doing here?" she asked loudly enough for everyone in the office to hear. "You're clearly not needed for this. We're handling family business." Mr. Anderson adjusted his glasses and began reading from the document in front of him. "I, Richard James Mitchell, being of sound mind and body, declare this to be my last will and testament." He started with the formal language, but I saw Mom already smiling triumphantly. That smile froze when Mr. Anderson continued, "To my beloved granddaughter, Carla Johnson, I leave my house at 1542 Oak Street, along with all its contents, and my entire savings account containing $475,000. The room went deadly silent for a moment. Then Mom's voice shattered it. "What? This can't be right." She snatched the document from Mr. Anderson's hands, her eyes scanning frantically. "Where's my part? I'm his daughter." Mr. Anderson calmly retrieved the will. "Mrs. Waters, your father's wishes are quite clear. He leaves everything to Miss Carla Johnson. There is no provision for you in the will. This is impossible. Mom's face had turned scarlet. She manipulated him. She poisoned him against me. I'll sue. I'll contest this will. The will is ironclad, Mr. Anderson stated firmly. Your father had it properly witnessed and notarized 6 months ago. He was of completely sound mind, as attested by his doctor. Any attempt to contest it would be futile and expensive. Mom's strategy suddenly shifted. The rage in her eyes transformed into tears as she turned to me. Carla, sweetie, please, she pleaded, her voice honey-sweet now. We've already given up our apartment. We moved everything out yesterday. We have nowhere to go. You can't just throw us out on the street. We're family. I stood up, holding the folder Mr. Anderson had just handed me. Inside were the deed to the house, ownership transfer documents, and all the legal paperwork confirming my ownership of the property. Family? I asked quietly. Like how you threw my belongings onto the lawn before Grandpa was even in his grave. Like how you tried to steal my college fund? Like how you've treated me for the past 4 years? That was different. We were. This is your problem, not mine, I cut her off, turning to leave. I suggest you start looking for a new apartment. I drove straight to Grandpa's house, my house now, but I couldn't get in. I pulled out my phone and called a locksmith, explaining the situation. When he arrived, I showed him my freshly notarized ownership documents. I'm the legal owner of this house, I explained, showing him the paperwork. I need you to open these locks and then change them to new ones. I want to be the only one with the keys. As the locksmith worked, I gathered up everything that belonged to Mom, Robert, and Emma, all the clothes they'd already unpacked, their toiletries from the bathrooms, Emma's posters she'd already stuck to my old bedroom wall. I loaded it all into garbage bags, just as they'd done with my things. When the locksmith finished and handed me the new keys, I dragged all their bags onto the front porch and arranged them neatly. The symmetry of the situation wasn't lost on me, their belongings now sat where mine had been just days ago. As the sun began to set, I heard the familiar sound of Mom's car pulling into the driveway. I watched through the living room window, Grandpa's favorite spot to read his morning paper, as their reactions played out exactly as I'd expected. What is this? Mom's shriek could be heard clearly through the closed windows. Our things? All our things are outside. I opened the door, but stood firmly in the doorway as they approached. Mom's face was red with fury, Robert looked like he'd swallowed something sour, and Emma was already crying theatrical tears. How dare you? Mom stormed up the porch steps. We live here now. You can't do this to us. Actually, I can. This is my house now, legally and rightfully. You need to take your belongings and leave. We have nowhere to go, Emma wailed. You should have thought about that before giving up your apartment, I replied coolly. Not my problem. Mom tried to push past me into the house, but I stood my ground. Move, Carla. This is ridiculous. This is my father's house. No, it's my house now. And if you don't leave immediately with your things, I'm calling the police to report you for trespassing. After that, all these bags go straight to the dumpster. I pulled out my phone. Your choice, Mom. Just like you gave me a choice about my things a few days ago, remember? The next few minutes were filled with cursing and threats as they gathered their bags. Mom alternated between crying and screaming about how unfair it all was, while Emma kept saying I'd regret this. Robert muttered under his breath about contesting the will. As they loaded the last bag into their car, Mom turned to me one final time. You're no daughter of mine. Your father would be ashamed of you. I smiled sadly. No, Mom. Dad would be proud that I finally stood up for myself. Goodbye. I watched them drive away, their car disappearing around the corner. That was 6 months ago. I'm in my final semester now, about to graduate with honors. The house is being rented to a lovely young family, their monthly rent payments are helping me build my savings, just as Grandpa would have wanted. I found his letter in the study safe that first night, after everyone left. My dearest Carla, it began, if you're reading this, it means you've already dealt with your mother's reaction to my will. I'm sorry I had to put you through that, but I knew Sarah too well. I knew what she would try to do. You have your father's integrity and my business sense, use them both wisely. The house is yours to do with as you please. Just promise me you'll keep the family photos in the attic. Some memories are worth keeping, even the painful ones. I kept that promise, along with the others I made to both him and Dad. I'm focusing on my future now, letting go of the past, but keeping the lessons it taught me. Sometimes family isn't who you're born to, sometimes it's who believes in you, who protects you, who helps you grow. Mom, Robert, and Emma still live somewhere in the city. I hear they found a new apartment eventually. They've tried to contact me a few times, usually when they need something, but I don't respond. Some chapters of our lives are better left closed.